proudly serve on the board. I was not selected because of my finance background, and I don't think any of our board members are appointed for that reason. So I'm here to show my support. I'm very proud to be a library board member, but I am not a budget expert. I'm here to support the board and support Stephanie, but I could certainly come to a meeting every 6 months, but I don't know what I would have to offer in regard to the budget. Library programming, yes. Budget, no. So I think you are the person on our board probably who has the most expertise.
I was
on the
brought
budget.
on because of education.
Right, exactly.
Well, in theory, we shouldn't be talking about a budget without also talking about why we're doing it. Programming, education.
Right.
You need to have
Well, right, I certainly never, when I was appointed to serve on the library board, thought I'd be making decisions about air conditioning units.
Yeah.
I did not think that would be part of my responsibility as a volunteer to serve on the board.
But as a whole, I mean, it's part of the whole library system responsibility. It's you guys' responsibility to work with her or them
Right.
to do those things. It's not just occupying a seat at a meeting.
Right, well, and that's why I have to rely on Stephanie for information about the budget and about maintenance, because that's my area.
I would like to have an environment where they could reach out to us if they feel. Sure. And I don't think that's there yet.
I would think the first thing you should do is read the authorities that you've given under state law. They're very broad. And number 9 is take any actions deemed necessary and proper by the board to establish, equip, operate, and maintain an effective library system. That is just a massive, you can do anything you want under that.
Well, that's why
you need to be more involved.
you had said that we needed to present the council with our budget. We
Because that's
also
what the
gave
law
Mr. Robert, right, but then, and you can, I felt as though you were saying, we tried to circumvent Mr. Roper by giving you all the budget and our package, but we didn't, we gave it all at the same time, so everybody had all the same information at all the same time.
Yeah, no, I think it's great, because under the law, it says you have to present it to
Right,
council.
and that's what you always said.
My only point is, this is one of the things we paid him for.
Right, so make, but we didn't circumvent it.
Did I use the word circumvent?
No, but when you say, we pay him to do it, and you gave it to us, and then we gave it to him, that.
I know the
You
law.
did exactly what
The
you
law
were asked
says
to do.
you have to
Exactly.
present it to council. Question is, your budget is within a bigger picture of what's going on. He knows that bigger picture. You don't, and honestly,
Right.
that's why, as our right-hand man, I would want him to see everything. And in this case, I'd love to take, he's gonna take this capital list and actually talk to his people and cut it down to what's affordable.
Does he have that discussion? Does he have it?
He should. But I think the meetings every 6 months are a good idea. I just wouldn't vote to do it because they're going to upset other people who.
I will withdraw my motion.
Okay, she's withdrawing her motion. Thank you.
Under the agreement that we've all seemed to be making out loud in the minutes that we.
Ms. Nations, will you make sure that we get these meetings scheduled moving forward? Thank you.
Thank you.
My other question, or my other suggestion, and for you guys to consider, if we're asking him to do that, so I get your point, because, again, when I got elected, I felt like I had to go through a doctoral study on everything, drinking from a fire hose for the first 9 months. Cause I never thought, to Dr. Wilson's point, I never thought we talked about food, I never thought I'd have to do that either. I would love to hear from you guys as a board. Look, this is our wish list. This is what in Utopia, we want to solve all these problems. Knowing that we can't, that we don't have the funding to do all of it, what is your priority system and recommendation for the county combined with whatever Mr. Roper's folks come up with? Because I think that's important. Because he's going to look at it purely from a financial situation. But you guys are going to look at it from through a whole different lens. And I think there's some communication that we should be able to do that way.
But will the board then set the priorities, or will Ken set the priorities?
The council, I don't want to argue. It's the council will listen to the recommendations and we'll decide whether it's, we agree or not. I mean, it's just like the folks from the accommodations tax, there's a board that meets and they come by and they say, here's what we think you should do. We don't always do that. Right? I mean, so there's nothing different in this. This is what do you think the priorities are? And then the six of us have an opportunity to talk about it, and we'll see this point, and we'll see this point, and then we can decide.
Yeah, there's one point I want to add to that. He has to maintain those buildings. So he knows the buildings, he knows what's gonna happen in the future. He sees priorities differently, because that roof that's about to fall in on XYZ building, he's gonna have to do something about it. So he's gonna see it from that point of view. You'll see it from the programming point of view. It's both of you coming together. Now, if you wanna maintain your own buildings and they charge you back for that maintenance, then you can do what you want. That's my feeling.
Do you have a construction project manager, slash librarian, who's just like really good with card catalogs, he also has a civil engineering degree?
That's what they hired.
Yeah, but that's you have to manage those folks, right? They give you answers, but you gotta know what they actually said. But I mean, you know, you can dumbfound somebody with HVAC talk, right? So, I mean, when it comes down to it, I would prefer that Ken have a representative and they're talking about, you know, building stuff. First thing I asked you for was send somebody up to Dacusville, right? You know, cause the rec director up there, I think she's a real estate agent, she has no idea how to fix the goalpost or whatever it is, you know, the lights up there. If you have expertise in a department, and then having to, oh man, I've done the whole build back dance before, right? And then you create a build back czar, you know, and he's just beating this guy's up, and these guys over here get away with it. Let's not get into that. I'd rather than talk about their operational costs. I will just, because you did the motion earlier, here, for me personally, clearly there's some trust issues, right? And you know, and to me, if you didn't understand why, and we don't have a good reason and whatnot, I'm gonna go into we take them off the mill this year. I would prefer we have a nice, rain dance every 6 months, and then we have an understanding of the capital piece of it. You have somebody that goes through and makes sure, I'd like to make that room legal and easily, but I'd also like to have some handicap ramps in other places. So at the end of the day, for my purposes, you know, the change makes total sense, right? To put them in the same kind of a pot where we can operationalize them in the same way we do in other places. I try to explain that to you guys. I believe it makes you guys, and it puts you guys on equal territory of all the other guys. The sheriff comes in and says, I'm going to jail. It's a political discussion after he makes his proposal. You guys come in and say, hey, these things right here are going to help us outreach, blah, blah, blah. It's going to help with this and then the other 95 programs in the schools. Right, it's a different discussion than right now. We're talking about a mill. For me, it's pull the mill conversion off for this year, and I'm all for it. I'm completely for it. But not if you guys don't feel like you completely understand it, because you got to operationalize it. And you know, and like you said, there's a law around how your board is supposed to work, right? It's not just an operational board, right? You know, it's fiscal oversight board, right? It's an executive level board for you, an intermediary to. I'd love to have one of those for the sheriff. The greatest thing ever. You know, I mean, how do we get one for the sheriff? I mean, you know, I thought that we could do that by having community watches in 7 different areas or whatever, because community watch would be a de facto board for the sheriff, right? In y'all's case, you have a board. It's there for a very specific reason. And it's an executive. It's not to pick whether or not you can have card catalog night on 3rd Tuesdays. It's to help you with some of these executive decisions so that when we get it, it's digested. So I'm good with, we pulled the millage thing for this year. We work with you guys so that you get to the point where we're not trying to pull the rug out from under you. What we're trying to tell you is that we'd like to be able to treat you like an equal partner in the way that we do all the other departments. She's still not gonna work for us. We're just, instead of us having to lower your millage to match your budget or raise your millage to match your budget and getting rid of the entire, which defeats the trust we're hoping we build. When you guys think it's like this, like you said earlier, I started using your language. They went from 19 down to 6. It's not even, we just didn't approve how much you asked for, or we were proposing not to approve what you asked for. But folks in the community thought that was going to be a cut. It's not a cut if you don't get what you asked for. You're gonna get more than you had before, so it's an increase. So to me, to build trust, to operationalize some of these teamwork elements we're talking about within the departments, we can pull them in this discussion, because clearly they're not comfortable with it because of the trust element. You know, and some of that's reinforced by about this time every year, you guys get attacked for some cultural issue or some sort of whatever. And you know, and when they come to me with it, I'm thinking the Constitution says it protects people against infringement by the government, right? So you'll have to offer services that look total. Let's get away from the political piece of it, just treat them like everybody else. So to me, the motion is pull the millage conversion for this year, and I like to use that word for this year, and then do this exercise with you guys. And I would say, when you come out recruiting for somebody to join your board, find somebody that has a banking, or a finance, or an economics background, because it makes it a lot easier to listen to your peer talk about it when they know. You don't need too many engineers on any group, you don't need too many economics guys or finance guys on any group, you need a big balance, because y'all do services, right? So you have an opening coming up this year, I think.
Yes,
Right?
two.
So let's put a banker and a finance guy there.
So,
Finance person.
some clarification, you started with, you said I have a motion and then went on for like 3 minutes. What is the clear
More
motion?
like 7 minutes, but I appreciate that, it's very generous of you. So my motion is that we pull the millage conversion for this year, right? While we build what looks to me like an operational level of trust between the entities.
Didn't we already do that publicly?
I don't know, we didn't,
You did, she took it out of reading through them, took it out.
So it's already out. Okay, well then go, we go home.
I wanted to piggyback on that. When I was on the board that was starting Lakes and Bridges, the charter school in Eastleigh, one of the weird things about charter schools is you don't get money for a building. So they defined and redo a building. The school was started by 4 retired teachers. If you had a question about dyslexia and education, those 4 teachers knew everything. They were writing the curriculum down to the page. They didn't know how to renovate a building in Eastleigh within the rules of a charter school system and law. So we put someone on the board who had built a building at Clemson University, had been the entire target manager. And even though he was a secondary member of the board, if you will, he was not one of the founding members, he was the point person for all of this and knew it and could then come to the board, who were educators, and present it. So I would recommend, I hear you on, you need a finance person on your board always. We always at board meetings have a finance person and a lawyer, number 1, if you can do that. I realize we're short on board members and it is hard to find volunteers, but if you can get a building person on, that can go a long way for what Councilman Seda and Councilman Wilson have asked, and Costner on the strategy point, to have someone who can really just come in here and talk about buildings.
But correct me if I'm wrong, is the library board, neither the library board nor Stephanie appoints board members, correct?
Right, that's
So
the-
that's you.
So that is a great point. However, there is nothing keeping Stephanie or you from recruiting folks.
Right, but the decision is.
The decision is
That's
ours,
correct.
but somebody's gotta apply,
Right.
right? Somebody's gotta put in the application.
We need the application.
And say, I'm a building guy, I wanna be on the board.
Yeah.
And we'll go, oh, there's one.
And typically, Mr. Roper or or the clerk will clarify when they'll bring to us, this one's been vetted by, or this one was it's actually, I think the term is at the recommendation of, X, Y, Z, whether it be planning, whether it be, and sometimes that weighs in, I don't know if we wanna go that route. And sometimes seems like with a vetted, they're a good fit, looking at the big picture. Some council members, take the time and they talk to every person that applies. Some pick and choose which one they wanna talk to. So there's homework done and due diligence done, but if we know it's someone that your board wants, so the board chair sends a letter of support for a person, that does bring some weight with it.
Okay, that's new information too, so that's great.
How many openings are on your board, correct?
There will be
In
3.
June.
We had somebody resign.
We have one that
Yeah.
resigned.
What area are they from?
Yours is one of them, by the way.
It is.
Liberty resigned, so his came up, and then Clemson.
So, I think,
That, in June is the end of that term.
Which is just
Mine-
next
mine
month.
were-
I believe so, yes.
If she wanted to.
But she just stays in here until December, that's correct, nothing else happens, right?
that's correct. I wanted some clarification, so District 4 is no longer gonna meet, or are they gonna serve out until we?
They resigned.
So they're no
They're
longer.
no
gonna-
longer serving.
Okay. So is that something we could do, if we had
Yes.
somebody immediately, we could do?
Could.
Yes.
Actually, I think you must.
I have a few
I think
applications
the word,
that I'm gonna
I think
bring to council.
vacancy shall be filled. Is that what it says? Well, I guess that shall doesn't give you time.
But that doesn't mean that at the end of their term, you have to go, they can wait,
No,
if you're right, there's, they gotta
But
do
there's,
it.
yeah, it just says vacancy shall be filled in the manner that you normally fill in.
Right,
It
and the
doesn't
reason
put
I asked
timing on it.
The reason that I asked the question is normally we would wait and try to appoint everybody at the same time. In this case, it would mean that we probably should, if we've got something to consider, talk about it at the next meeting.
Right, and especially you missed one quorum, you know, the month of July, so, yeah. Now, I wanna bring up a topic that we didn't discuss this year as much, but we've discussed in years past. And I'm curious your thoughts and feelings as a board, specifically as a board. I'm sure you've had some conversation. If you haven't, I wanna bring it up. We've talked about the museum in great detail in the past. In fact, when Councilman Whitehurst sat in that seat, we talked about it in this room over the past several years and trying to find a way to figure out where the museum fits best in the big picture of county government. You have to learn from history. If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it, and not all of history needs to be repeated, and I think we can all agree on that. Saying that, it is a cultural piece. It is a piece that it's not the same as the library, but there are some crossover similarities. What is the board's feeling on, have you broached the conversation or subject of the museum and taken over those operations? What is the generalized feeling? I see you shaking your head.
That actually did come up, and I'm not sure if Lori or Karen were
They
on
were,
the
two of the
board,
board members weren't there for that.
at that time, and our conversation was, we didn't see a problem except budget. And,
Right.
you know, the money, would that be expenses out of the already library budget to cover things? We can see where, you know, there's an advantage to the museum, and, again, the library provides a lot of educational things, so it goes under that category. But the conversation that we had on that particular, when that particular board was meeting was budget. We didn't know how it would fit. Are we responsible for the monies that would have to go into it? Would there be additional monies?
We're not, we've shown, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, we're not the state. We don't believe in unfunded mandates or giving you a product without giving you money to go with it of some sort. You know, it's not like the road system, you know, where we adopted hundreds of miles of road for free. We don't believe in that. We've proven that in the past, and so my personal vision, in this council, I don't think we've fully sat down and talked about exactly what it needs to look like or should look like. But my personal vision is, we know what it costs to run a museum, and we can't add to your already tax, we can't say just absorb it. You know, that's not realistic, period. Now, there is room in the educational mill where we rolled off to meet your budget last year, right? Instead of it being, I forgot what the military was, but you could have kept some of the educational mill there, and it could have rolled off on the other side, on the general fund side. You know, we could have rolled that off and put it in no way. You wouldn't have seen the difference. You know, the same amount of money would have been collected at the end of the year, kind of thing. So there is or was room with the growth of that mill to do that. But now, what exactly that would look like, I don't know, because I've never officially asked the library board, what is your feelings on this? And Mr. Roper and I haven't talked about this in a year, so I don't even know his feelings anymore. But I know that we need to have the conversation. I feel like the question needs to be asked. If it's something that your board's not familiar with, I would love for your board to have some conversation to be familiar with it, just like we probably need to have some conversation with.
I'd be happy to talk about it in a board meeting.
Yes.
And be right to inform about it.
The budget for the museum was $96,000.
Yeah.
One thing I like about that is having heard a couple references they don't have a strategy. I've heard of strong strategy from them, and that the public and the annual reports we're getting is how much they need meeting space, which you've already brought up. I like the idea that the museum opens up another space to meet in a different location, like an educational program. We just gave it some new floors, so we're putting in some new floors, so, I would like to see another county that has education, has a library and museum under the same system. I'm sure it exists.
I researched it last time, and I think there was one, and as I remember that conversation, it started out take on the museum, I was fine with it, there's a lot of overlap there, that Tabitha, who runs it now, used to work for Pickens County Library System, and Daniel now works at the library, but, it started out great, and then it was like, we're not going to, you're gonna keep your mill the same, but we're not gonna give you the funding for the
Yeah.
library, and there's one person working there now, so the conversations that we had in terms of management was, we wanted to make sure that museum was up to the level of the libraries. So if you wanna do programming, you're gonna have more staff, so, and that's what I talked with Ken about, you know, it's like, yeah, it would be great, but I need at least one more staff person, you know, so it's not only taking what they have, but maybe a little bit more, so we can run that in a way, or we can really start doing stuff at the museum again, and a level that we're used to, where we can really put resources, but there's also some overlap there. I never thought that it was a bad idea. I think there's a lot of overlap there that could be really interesting, for the county, but it, like she said, it was a funding issue.
We, to that point, we, after these conversations happened and seemed to not really grow, on their own, kind of re-emphasize some of the things we're doing at the museum. We have 2 public meeting spaces, they won't be large, you know, they'll be relatively meager compared to some of the things the library system has, but we will have 2 more meeting spaces at the museum. And actually, the month of April was the highest visitation for the Pickens County Museum in its history. So we're making progress at the museum. That's not to say that it might be a good strategic step one way or the other. It's just on our side, I think we've got a passionate employee. Building maintenance is doing a little extra work out there where we haven't been doing maybe what we've been doing, for example, with the library system. We're trying to do some of that with the museum, and y'all approve that, so we really appreciate that.
Any questions, clarification? I know that we didn't come to any finality on anything. I realize that, I really do.
It seems to me that the library and the museum, and I wouldn't want to put it under solid waste. I mean, they need executive leadership, right? I wouldn't want to put it under the sheriff or the coroner. It seems to me that there's, you know, and just from a career opportunity, you know, think about that, right? Just from a program development, it seems to me that what you guys do is a lot more aligned to what the library, what the museum does than any other entity in the county. I think that there could be some strengths and some outreach for you guys. Purposes of, you know, meeting space, people have to know it's available, right? And I don't know how you guys, you know, manage and schedule your meeting space, but you know, if you gain a couple of rooms, you gain a place that can maybe be an after hours, I've been to aquariums and things with kids at night. There could be all sorts of things that adds to you. I would not want to stick here with the problem without understanding how you guys feel like you could best manage it to make the most of it.
I actually agree, I think it's a good idea, and I was the one that said you should just take it without a budget increase, because your budget was naturally just growing on its own. I think that you say $436,000, which is 5 times the museum budget, I felt you could pay for it easily. And I think there's synergy in workforce, you just have one person over there, you have 56 employees, so I think if there's any substitution.
They're all maxed out.
Yeah,
And we can't get any more.
So, to that
I was
point,
okay with that.
you had said, y'all, was it asking for a part-time to go full-time, or asking for a part-time?
Just part-time.
Sort of those.
Did you, with help of public relations?
That person is overworked.
Any other questions for the board?
I have another question, if you don't mind.
Please.
On a monthly basis, how many programs you guys have? How many people come in and, you know, whatever? Is it 100?
100 programs?
Like 4 or 5 a day? Do you have events like that? One
I
in each
mean,
library a day?
it would be close.
Yeah.
So 1 month, right? I mean,
Yes.
the comic book that you guys see that, it's impressive, right? So you have tons of programs on a daily basis, right?
They also put up this piece too,
But they're worked out.
that had 8,094 room reservations, 34,174 people attended.
And that's not library programs. That's
You know,
external.
all of that.
That's external groups that are coming
That's
to
external.
use our spaces.
And what we're running into, and I was thinking, because of our biggest, we do not have big enough, that's great, and I would love to, you're probably already doing it, promote those spaces as extra spaces where people can meet, because the smaller rooms are getting utilized a ton. But it's just that our biggest room is so small right now. Our biggest room is at Hampton, and it can't facilitate what we need, that's why we're breaking out into those rooms, whether we're supposed to be using them or not, and it's more and more and more. And we're running out of big spaces.
So I'm sorry, I apologize. So you need a 30-person space, or do you need a 200-person?
We need a 600-person space, a 300-person, well, right now, 80 and 180, I think is our limit, if it's kids and adults, is for easily. And we're easily getting over that in the summer, and now we're reaching 80 in our regular
But what
program.
would the 600 space do? What kind of event? What are you talking about?
I would do quarterly, big event, big author event, but
Our summer
Somebody
reading
up like on
programs.
stage doing a presentation of some
Yeah.
kind of one. Why aren't they over there? Why don't they manage like those kind of events?
They've contacted, I know the PAC to do some
I
stuff, they're
tried,
booked though for a while.
and they're booked, and it's, our space would be more of a flex space, so we can have whatever, like our critter keeper, that's great for you can do it in an auditorium, but it's better when people can be all the way around him. It's just some things are better in a multifunctional, if you wanna do a dance lessons or self-defense class, you know, which is, we do all kinds of stuff, you can't do that in an auditorium. And we would love to work with a package, but they're
What
booked.
about like the high school stuff? They have, massive auditoriums that are empty probably.
They have a lot of rules on who can use them.
And then just massive spaces where the cafeterias are very wide open.
When I've been told insurance reasons, you can't have like non-students. We've tried to get access to schools for stuff, and they just say you can't.
Remember the church meeting over there before, right?
Yeah, I've gone to many meetings at Pickens High School that were not school related.
Were they government related though?
It was like a spaghetti, whatever, for when they used the cafeteria and everything, they were raising money for some private organization.
Or private, right?
Well, it was a nonprofit, but it wasn't a government organization, it might have been, maybe it was the chamber or something like that, it was a spaghetti, whatever, and they were using the cafeteria and everything, it was a very big area, which was their cafeteria.
We partnered last year with, the Five Points Church because of the fiasco.
We try to get a backup at every location.
But they just don't, they won't follow you.
They
For
want
some
to
reason.
come to the
They wanna come to
library.
the library.
So here's my question. So the big space, right, the kids are meeting in, sheet rock that, sprinkle it, air condition it. I mean, what's the bottom dollar? What are you talking about? What are we, I mean, is it every single bit of this? It seems like there's other stuff in this. Just, help me out here. Are we talking about 1.2?
I mean, we can go back to them and say what's bottom dollar, but then it's like, you have to have bathrooms up there, you're gonna require space, and you have to, at least. We can get bare minimum.
No, you gotta have the bathrooms, right? You gotta have bathrooms, you gotta have sprinkle, whatever. I'm just saying, what, a general space that you guys can use in the form that you're talking about. What are you talking about? Just like, what is the bare minimum that you could do and make that place not fill fire code and be very useful? Because right now, you've got exposed insulation on walls. And as this stuff dries, you've got problems, right? So what's the bottom dollar?
I mean, I don't think we put in a lot of frills. The most expensive thing that we kind of thought, we can only do 3 of these because they're really expensive, were the divider walls. I mean, that's when, there were no real,
You're talking about the accordion walls you pull across the.
yeah, they're really expensive, so we were like, we're only doing 3. I mean, there wasn't it was a lot of HVAC, a lot of wiring, a lot of plumbing, it was all that stuff. We never really thought that there were any sort of extra frills to it. We didn't get super fancy with, technology. I know we wanted security in there, but I think you've got to have it, because we've got security all over that library. We've got to have it in those
What do you mean by
spaces.
technology? Talking about like presentation
Yeah,
systems?
nothing fancy,
Sound.
just basic. Everything we did was really basic, and that's how expensive it was in the end. We can go back and say, let's get even more basic, but like that HVAC system, something has to be done, and that was a huge cost.
Can you have somebody in your crew that can lead up the discussion of how we do a value engineer on this?
Well, they could certainly, be a resource. I wouldn't wanna.
We've been working with two, like Palacio was helping us with, and then Harbor Construction, like, we've been working with these people and our architect, and we're like, we don't want frills, it may look good, but like, we had that conversation, it's just paint, you know? We really did not want anything extra, we want the space done so it's usable, as soon as possible.
So, here's a question, and I think it's the same one you have. You just listed architect and engineer and all these things, right? And that's money.
Yep, and it's
That's-
gone
that's-
next year, we had it in our budget and it's not budgeted anymore.
That's money. It would have to come from their budget. I'm not saying let's pay for this out of the general fund. I wanna be very clear on that.
Yeah.
But we could give a rough idea, get an estimate, whatever. Do we have the manpower to do? It may be cheaper to do ourselves, it may not be cheaper to do ourselves.
Right, well, what we would have to look at is having the staff engineer give us an opinion on that, and I don't.
We seem to always come in under budget when you guys build big stuff.
Yeah, Rodney, that's our engineer, his bread and butter is civil kind of road projects. I mean, that's what we're proving, so, I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't look at it, I'd be glad for him to look at it and try to give whatever feedback we can. I just don't wanna raise expectations too high about that it's gonna be.
And I get that 100%, and this board would have to agree with it and come back and say that's what we wanna do, because, you know, I think that's the way I understand it's supposed to work. But I think that if we don't have 3.3 million to spend, if you can do it for what you do have, it kinda makes sense, and it's being a good steward of the money.
And that's what I'd like to do is say, hey, is this still, looking at everything, is this still your main priority? And then go back to our architect with money from somewhere and say, this is what we have. Cause that's another thing we've never really been clear on, is how much we have. And Ralph has told me things and it's not, what you understand. How much do we have to spend on the project?
$2.9 million is the amount you've got.
But we have 3.9 million in our reserve fund.
So if you ask me how much the county has right now in the bank, I can't tell you, it's a flood, the same thing with y'all.
But you look at that valley, you take that valley and then you take 2 months out of that valley and you go to 2.9.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And,
What would be the right thing to do is to take the 2.9, which is your lowest balance, and then subtract probably 15% from that, and that's probably what you're safe on spending. Now, because if you spend the 2.9 and something else comes in, you pay for it, you're gonna
Right.
bounce a check, okay? So you need a cushion, and that cushion is at 15 to 20%. So I would take the 2.9 and subtract, let's say 15%. And that would be what you would have. Right? Cause it's, the 15 is the emergency, right? Cause you, like I said, if you got 2.9 and you spend 2.9 and $1, you're gonna bounce a check. So now something could come in that you don't know about, and you're forced to spend that dollar.
Right. And
So you
that's-
want a cushion below the
Right.
2.9.
And that's what I'm saying, when I get a good number, and if they say that's a priority, I'm gonna take that back to our architect or construction and say, what can we do? With this is what we have, council doesn't wanna spend beyond this, how far can it go if this is still the top priority of the board?
2.9 is the fund balance, is the operating fund, correct?
Yes.
Okay, what is the amount in the reserve fund?
There is no reserve fund. There's no
Whoa,
such
whoa,
thing.
whoa, whoa, whoa. This is where we get in trouble. This is where we get confusion, okay? Councilman Saylor is not incorrect by saying there is no reserve fund.
Okay.
All right, the county, we pass a budget. We operate out of our general fund. You can call it a reserve fund. People like to call it a reserve fund. It's not a reserve fund. It's the money that you have. So it's the cash on hand. It's not my paycheck coming in 2 weeks. It's what I physically have in the bank right now. It's the money that can be spent right now. That 2.9 number comes from, you look at the valley, and you said 15%.
Yeah, and it's not clear probably that this is the year, that's what you're looking at here is the
Right.
year. So this is right before the tax bills come in, that's when all the money gets collected, so y'all are living off this.
Then why
So
at
by
the
being-
board, at the council meeting, did they say we had $4 million in our
Okay.
reserve fund?
I didn't say reserve.
Correct.
I said your current balance was $4 million, which was probably here. And then Henry said, That's not savings, and he was correct.
Yeah.
Right, so this is what you have on hand,
We have $4 million.
$4 million, but you're gonna spend some of this through the year.
Right.
So if you're gonna spend $4 million, you'll be bouncing checks all over.
So you're saying 2.9 is our operating?
2.9 is what you have that you don't need to spend on operations.
Okay,
Now, if you spend all 2.9 and something comes in suddenly.
Right.
And you're gonna go to 2.8, you're gonna start bouncing checks. So you need a cushion below the 2.9.
Because as you get your money, we pass the budget in July. Money is not gonna come in, so you're gonna start spending, or you will be spending anyway. No money's coming in, you're deducting, nothing's coming in. If you look, it looks like it was actually December before you really started collecting.
Yep.
3 million.
And that trend line looks the same for us.
It
To
does.
your point, Mr. Chairman.
It does. And it's the same. The only difference, you're on your own millage. It's you and you alone. There is no one else. There is not a bigger, general fund. It is yours and yours alone. Which means it is yours and yours alone. You've got to cover your salaries. You got to cover your power bill. You've got to cover your insurance. You got to, where if you were in the county's general fund, you're not worried about that dip as much because the general fund is bigger for the county.
This number's 30.
Right. You should have stay on budget or have a good reason why you didn't.
Right.
What are you saying?
So that peak has grown over time. In other
So
words,
in February, we should have 4 point,
I guess your argument for savings is currently you carried over last year 332,000, which made that 2.6 is now 2.9.
This,
That's right.
this is what I'm talking about, there's 3.6.
But you gotta have cash flow.
Right,
That's
and
what
that's
he's
what
talking about.
Ralph has talked about before, you've gotta have some in there, but how much do you want in there?
Well,
Is
the
there
thing is,
numbers?
you want at least 2.9 and just before your next tax revenue comes in, because somebody's gonna come to you on November 31st and ask for money. And if it's zero, you'll bounce a check, because your next day is when your money's coming in. So it's probably about 2.9 minus 15, you probably got about $2.5 million.
And then there are government entities that make recommendations for this, and like you said, about 15% is the sort of minimum. It's obviously ideal to have more than that, right, because you never know what's gonna happen.
That HVAC system goes out, that was unplanned or unexpected, or you've got to buy a shredder, or whatever, you know, that's the purpose of that. But it's not a savings account, and I think a lot of people think it is, it's not. And that number has grown, to Councilman Savis' point, over the years. In 21, you carried over almost 400,000, which meant if you were at 2.5, now you're at 2.9 or whatever. And I think that's where some of the misconception comes from. Now you can spend because you know 2.9 or whatever that number is your bottom. So subtract out, to his point, 15%, you know, somewhere between 15 and 18 more. To Dr. Wilson's point, that amount is money that is
You can spend your,
right.
even under an emergency, because you got it covered. So it's like a checking account, let's say you have 3,000, you start the.
I understand it, it's just
Yeah.
that we've been given different numbers.
Right.
So-
How much
It's hard to understand.
we have.
So now I'm gonna be very candid. He's not in the room to defend himself, and I'm just gonna say this though. I appreciate Ralph, even though he drives me crazy at times. More than anybody will know, I appreciate Ralph. Ralph tried his best to explain to me, and I could not understand. It was going to one of these little classes somewhere that I learned. I don't know if it was SCAC, ACOG, somebody, where I truly grasped government accounting and how that part of it all works. The coroner, Councilman Senate was asking if the coroner comes and blah, blah, blah. She used to be up here all the time. I've asked her the last 2 years. She didn't want to, because once she understood government finance and government accounting, and it clicked with her and it made sense, she didn't need it anymore, because she saw where it was coming. We weren't robbing her, is the way that maybe she looked at it in the past. So I think that would be a huge help for you guys, because it is so different.
well, it always sounds like we have 2 separate accounts, when in reality, we do not.
Correct.
So,
No, it's like.
you still have Pickens Politics? You still have a website? So in like 2011, we had to educate the entire Freedom County on it, right? Because everybody wanted to spend the school district had like 4 months, and everybody wanted to spend it to keep on operations, right? Honestly, just go back and think Pickens County, what, 2011, 2012? Once literally the entire county was talking about it, and he wrote 50 articles about it. If you don't want to take a class, go back and.
Yeah, it's like a checking account, so I'll just give you.
Right. It's like you should have 6 months savings
Let's
in
say
your.
let's say.
Yeah. I get that, I just always thought we had 2 accounts.
Just listen to this for a second.
But I understand that.
Let me tell you something. You start with 0 in your checking. Now, Social Security gives you $3,000. So balance one is $3,000. Whatever, $3,000. And you spend $100 every day. So on day one, you have $2,900, $2,800, $2,700. The last day you have $100 you spend, you have 0. Now, how much savings is in that account? 0.
Right.
Because when you look at it on the 15th, you have $1,500 left, right? But you gotta spend that $1,500 the rest of the month. So there's no savings.
So the issue is calling it a reserve fund, when in reality, there is no reserve fund.
It's
There
one
was
account.
just some money carried over.
It's your own general fund,
Yeah,
basically.
Right.
yeah. So if you started the month with $3,000 and brought $3,000 in and spent $3,000, you'd have $3,000 at the end of the month, and that would be your savings.
General fund balance. You gotta be careful there, right?
Yeah,
It's the balance in the general fund at the lowest possible.
At the lowest point.
That's your savings.
Yeah. And which is what the county
Or
does.
you would call your reserve, but it's not an account, it's one account.
I get just a little bit of clarification for the board and myself and Ken on what our steps moving forward might be for the completion of whatever the priorities the board deems in order for that, spending that money that we have.
I think that the next steps that I've heard pretty much everyone in here, Councilman said asked a question, Dr. Wilson asked a question. We wanna know, knowing now what you know about the amount of money that's there, we wanna know what your priorities are. When do y'all meet again?
This month, next week.
Next week? If y'all could discuss it at your next meeting, would be phenomenal, but just because of the time crunch, thing that we're up against. We try to pass the budget by June, so that would be phenomenal. Now, whether we pass it the first week in June, probably not. But the reality of it all is, if y'all could discuss it, we wanna hear your priorities. Councilman said asked that question right out the gate, what are your priorities? You asked the question an hour and 10 minutes ago, what are your priorities? And I think that's the next step.
The board's priorities and then send to Ken.
I think you do it at the same time, he has your list, he has this book.
I would say, send them to me, send them to Megan, send them to all the council. But please make sure, Megan, Ken, get them as well.
It's the same